My name is Malerie, and for 6 months, I'd been the ghost in the machine. The one who organized the data that no one wanted to touch. The one who sat through 3-hour strategy meetings, scribbling notes while senior consultants threw around buzzwords like synergistic optimization and customer-centric paradigm shifts. I was the one who quietly fixed their math when the numbers didn't add up. But here's what they didn't know: I wasn't just taking notes. I was building something. Every meeting, every project, every late night spent in the office while everyone else went home to their lives, I was learning the business better than people who'd been there for years. When I first walked into Meridian's gleaming downtown office, I thought I'd won the lottery. Fresh out of college with a business degree and student loans that made my eyes water, I'd beat out 300 other candidates for this internship. The salary was barely enough to cover my studio apartment and instant ramen, but it was Meridian Consulting, the kind of place where Harvard MBAs went to make their fortunes. The office was everything I'd imagined: exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and the kind of expensive minimalism that screamed we're too successful to need decorations. Open floor plans where important people had important conversations. Conference rooms with names like Innovation and Synergy, where million-dollar deals were made over artisanal coffee. I was assigned to the Strategic Planning Division, which sounded impressive until I realized it meant I was at the bottom of a very tall food chain. Above me were the junior analysts, who looked down on interns like we were a different species. Above them were the senior analysts, who barely acknowledged our existence. Above them were the managers, who knew our names only when they needed something urgently. And at the top of my particular pyramid was Vanessa Chen. My supervisor, Vanessa Chen, was everything I thought I wanted to be when I started. 34, sharp-dressed, with a corner office and the kind of confidence that could cut glass. She spoke in board meetings like she owned the room, gestured with manicured nails, and had a laugh that sounded like success. She also had a habit of treating interns like furniture, useful when you needed something, invisible when you didn't. Vanessa had the kind of presence that made people listen. When she walked into a room, conversations paused. When she spoke, people took notes. She wore designer blazers that probably cost more than my monthly rent and carried herself like someone who'd never questioned her own worth. "Malerie," she'd say, not looking up from her phone, "can you pull the Q3 numbers and make them look prettier? The charts are a mess." I'd spend hours rebuilding entire presentations from scratch, turning her scattered bullet points into coherent narratives. She'd glance at my work for 30 seconds, make one cosmetic change, and submit it under her name. No thank you, no acknowledgement, just another day at Meridian. In the first few weeks, I told myself this was normal. I was learning. I was paying my dues. Every successful person had started somewhere, right? I watched Vanessa command respect in meetings and thought, someday, that'll be me. But as the months passed, I began to notice things. The way she'd lean back in her chair when clients asked technical questions, then look at me meaningfully until I jumped in with answers. The way she'd take credit for insights I'd said to her during breaks. The way she'd introduce me to important people as my intern, but never mention my name. I started keeping track of my contributions, not out of resentment but out of curiosity. How much of the work was actually mine? The answer was uncomfortable. By month 3, I was writing first drafts of everything. Market analyses, competitive assessments, client recommendations. Vanessa would add her name to the top and maybe rearrange a few paragraphs, but the substance was mine. The research was mine. The insights were mine. I told myself it was educational. I was getting experience most interns could only dream of. I was learning from the best. But late at night, in my tiny apartment, eating another dinner of microwaved leftovers while she posted Instagram stories from expensive restaurants, I wondered if I was learning the right lessons. The breaking point came with Project Lighthouse, a comprehensive digital transformation strategy for our biggest client, Grandview Industries. The kind of project that could make careers or destroy them. The kind Vanessa had been angling for since I'd started. Grandview Industries was a family-owned manufacturing company that had been around for 60 years. They made industrial equipment, not glamorous, but profitable. The kind of boring, stable business that consulting firms loved because they had money to spend and problems to solve. Their CEO, Richard Grandview, was the founder's son. He'd inherited a company that worked perfectly in 1985 but was struggling in 2023. Their ordering system was still paper-based. Their inventory management was tracked in Excel spreadsheets. Their customer service was a phone number that rang in someone's kitchen. They needed help, and they were willing to pay for it. "Malerie, I need you to take a look at this," Vanessa said one Thursday afternoon, sliding a folder across her desk. "Just polish it up. Make it shine." I opened the folder expecting to find a rough draft that needed editing. Instead, I found 12 pages of the most incoherent corporate word salad I'd ever seen. Sentences that started in one direction and ended in another. Charts that contradicted each other. A conclusion that had nothing to do with the analysis. It wasn't a rough draft. It was a disaster. The document read like someone had fed a business textbook into a blender. There were buzzwords everywhere: digital transformation, customer-centric innovation, agile methodologies, but no actual strategy. The competitive analysis mentioned companies that weren't even in the same industry. The market research was 3 years old. Worse, the recommendations were generic. Implement digital solutions. Optimize customer experience. Leverage data analytics. It was the kind of vague consulting speak that clients paid thousands of dollars to avoid. "When do you need this back?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Monday morning. It's going to the CEO. 4 days. 4 days to turn garbage into gold." I should have said something. Should have explained that 12 pages of nonsense couldn't be polished into a coherent strategy. Should have suggested we delay the presentation until we had more time. Instead, I nodded and took the folder home. I didn't sleep that weekend. I didn't leave my apartment except to buy coffee and ramen. I spread every document across my floor like I was solving a crime, trying to understand what Grandview Industries actually needed. I started from scratch. I researched their industry, their competitors, their market position. I analyzed their current technology stack, their customer base, their operational challenges. I read their annual reports going back 5 years. I studied case studies of similar companies that had successfully modernized. By Saturday night, I had a clear picture of what needed to happen. By Sunday morning, I had an outline. By Sunday night, I had something beautiful. I rebuilt the entire strategy from the ground up, using the research I'd been quietly compiling for months. I restructured the market analysis, rewrote the competitive landscape, and created an implementation timeline that actually made sense. The document I created wasn't just better than Vanessa's original, it was better than anything I'd seen at Meridian. It was thorough, practical, and actionable. It addressed Grandview's specific challenges with specific solutions. It had a phased implementation plan with realistic timelines and measurable outcomes. I included everything: technology recommendations, change management strategies, training programs, performance metrics. I created financial projections showing ROI over 3 years. I identified potential risks and mitigation strategies. By Sunday night, I had a 40-page document that could have been published in Harvard Business Review. It was the kind of work that gets you promoted, gets you noticed, gets you respect. Monday morning, I handed Vanessa a 40-page document that could have been published in Harvard Business Review. She flipped through it like she was browsing a magazine. "Looks good," she said. "Thanks. You'll get a shout-out if it goes well." A shout-out. 40 pages of original research and strategic thinking. For a weekend of my life I'd never get back. I didn't expect credit. I was an intern. But I saved everything. Every email. Every version. Every timestamp. Not because I was planning revenge, I just had a feeling I might need proof someday. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Vanessa scheduled multiple rehearsals, practicing my presentation like she'd written it herself. She memorized key phrases, studied the charts, and even adopted some of my speaking patterns. I watched her transform my work into her performance, and I had to admit she was good at it. She understood instinctively how to present complex information in digestible chunks. She knew how to read the room, when to pause for questions, when to push forward. But she didn't understand the work itself. When I asked her about specific methodology choices, she'd deflect with phrases like "I wanted to keep it simple" or "the data speaks for itself." Still, I told myself this was how business worked. Ideas belonged to the organization, not individuals. I was getting experience. I was learning. That someday came 3 weeks later. "Malerie, you're coming to the board presentation," Vanessa announced on a Tuesday morning. "Just to take notes, obviously." Obviously. The boardroom on the 20th floor was intimidating by design. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, a table that could seat 20, and the kind of silence that made you check your phone to make sure it wasn't on vibrate. I'd been in this room twice before, both times sitting in the corner while more important people discussed more important things. The first time, I'd been too nervous to speak above a whisper. The second time, I'd been too busy taking notes to look up. This time felt different. This time, I knew more about the subject matter than anyone else in the room. CEO Michael Davidson entered at exactly 9 a.m., followed by the senior leadership team. Davidson was one of those men who commanded attention without trying. Grey hair, kind eyes, and the reputation of someone who'd built his company from nothing. I'd researched him too, of course. MBA from Wharton, 20 years at McKinsey, founded Meridian in 2010 with 2 partners and a handful of clients. He was known for being fair but demanding, the kind of leader who remembered your name and your last project. The rest of the leadership team filed in. Janet Wu, the CFO, who had a reputation for asking the questions everyone else was afraid to ask. Marcus Thompson, head of operations, who could spot inefficiencies from across the room. Dr. Patricia Williams, head of technology, who joined from Google 6 months ago. These were people who knew good work when they saw it. People who could tell the difference between substance and flash. Vanessa positioned herself at the head of the table, her presentation queued up on the massive screen. I sat in the corner with my notebook, playing the role I'd been assigned. "Good morning, everyone," Vanessa began, her voice smooth and confident. "I'm excited to present our digital transformation strategy for Grandview Industries." For 40 minutes, she walked through my work, my analysis, my recommendations, my carefully crafted implementation plan. She fielded questions with the kind of authority that only comes from truly understanding the material, except she didn't understand it. She was performing from memory, reciting lines I'd written. But she was good at it. She knew how to make eye contact, how to use gestures for emphasis, how to pause for effect. She turned my dense analysis into compelling narrative. She made my recommendations sound inevitable, obvious, brilliant. I watched from my corner, taking notes on my own presentation, and felt something I'd never experienced before. Pride mixed with frustration. Admiration mixed with anger. I was watching a masterclass in presentation skills, delivered using my work. When the questions came, she handled them smoothly. When Davidson asked about the competitive landscape, she referenced my research without missing a beat. When we questioned the financial projections, she walked through my calculations like she'd done the math herself. There was only one moment when she stumbled. Dr. Williams asked about the specific technology recommendations, why we'd chosen one platform over another, what the integration challenges would be. Vanessa paused, glanced at her notes, then said, "The technical details are all in the appendix. But the key point is that we've selected solutions that align with Grandview's operational needs." It was a non-answer, but she delivered it with such confidence that Williams just nodded and moved on. When she finished, the room erupted in the kind of respectful applause that meant everyone was impressed. Davidson leaned back in his chair. "Exceptional work, Vanessa. This is exactly what Grandview needs. Who was involved in putting this together?" This was the moment. The moment where she could have said, "I had help from our intern, Malerie. She did incredible research." The moment where she could have shown an ounce of integrity. Instead, she smiled. "Thank you, Michael. I've been working on this for months. Of course, our intern helped with some of the typing." She gestured vaguely in my direction. "She's great with notes." The room chuckled. Light, dismissive laughter that felt like a slap. Some of the typing. Great with notes. I smiled and nodded, because that's what good interns do. But inside, something shifted. Not anger. Anger is hot and temporary. This was colder. More permanent. I'd spent a weekend of my life creating something beautiful, something valuable, something that would help a real company solve real problems. I'd poured everything I'd learned about business, about strategy, about consulting into 40 pages of careful analysis. And to her, I was just good with notes. After the meeting, people lingered to congratulate Vanessa. I heard phrases like breakthrough thinking and exactly what we needed, and this is why we pay the big bucks. She accepted the praise graciously, already talking about the follow-up work that would be needed. I packed up my notebook and headed back to my desk, but Davidson caught my arm in the hallway. "Malerie, right?" he said. "Yes, sir." Good notes in there. Very thorough. Thank you, sir. He studied my face for a moment, like he was trying to remember something. Then he nodded and walked away. That night, I called my best friend Emma. I need to talk to someone before I lose my mind, I said. Emma and I had been roommates in college, study partners in every class, and each other's reality checks for the past 6 months. She was working at a non-profit in Chicago, making barely enough to cover her rent but loving every minute of it. I told her everything. The weeks of work. The presentation. The dismissal. Wait, Emma said. You wrote the entire thing. Every word. And she called you a note-taker. In front of the CEO. In front of everyone. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, processing what I'd just told her. Malerie, that's not okay. That's not normal workplace dynamics. That's theft. But I'm just an intern. Stop. You're not just anything. You wrote a 40-page strategy that impressed the CEO. Don't let her gaslight you into thinking you're disposable. After we hung up, I sat in my studio apartment staring at my laptop screen. The presentation was still open, my name buried in the metadata where no one would ever see it. I opened a new folder and labeled it Lighthouse, Documentation. Then I started collecting everything. Email chains where Vanessa asked me to draft something quick. Slack messages where she said Malerie can handle the research. Version histories showing my name on every single file. Timestamps proving I'd worked through the weekend while she was posting Instagram stories from her yoga retreat. I wasn't planning revenge. I was protecting myself. But as I compiled the evidence, I started to see patterns I'd missed before. This wasn't just about Lighthouse. For 6 months, I'd been doing the work while she took the credit. For 6 months, I'd been building her reputation while my own contributions disappeared into the corporate ether. The documentation was damning. Email after email where she'd asked me to take the lead on research, then presented the results as her own insights. Slack conversations where she delegated entire sections of reports to me, then submitted them under her name. I wasn't just an intern who'd helped with typing. I was a strategic thinker who'd been systematically erased from my own work. The next morning, Vanessa was glowing. Word had spread about the Lighthouse presentation. People were stopping by her office to congratulate her. She'd been invited to present to the board again next month. Malerie, she said, barely looking up from her phone. I'm going to need you to start working on the follow-up analysis. Same format as before. Of course, I said. But this time, I did something different. I created everything in my personal Google Drive. I sent her only PDFs. I BC-said myself on every communication. And I made sure my name was embedded in the metadata of every file. If she wanted to take credit for my work, she'd have to work for it. 2 weeks later, HR announced an opening for a junior analyst position. My dream job. The next step up from intern. The position was perfect for me. It required exactly the skills I'd been developing, the experience I'd been gaining, the knowledge I'd been accumulating. The job description could have been written based on my resume. I knocked on Vanessa's door. I saw the posting for the analyst role, I said. I'd love to apply. She looked up from her computer, eyebrows raised like I'd just asked to borrow her car. Malerie, I think you're getting ahead of yourself. You're still learning the basics. Maybe next year, once you've proven yourself. I've been here 6 months. I've worked on every major project in the department. You've assisted on projects. There's a difference. Assisted. Like I was a child who'd helped mommy in the kitchen. I wrote the entire Lighthouse strategy, I said quietly. You contributed to the research. I provided the strategic framework. It was such a blatant lie that I almost laughed. But her expression was serious, like she actually believed it. Vanessa, I have the original documents. I have the email chains. I have the version histories. She stood up, her face flushing. Malerie, I think you're confused about your role here. You're an intern. You do what I tell you to do. You don't get to make demands. I'm not making demands. I'm stating facts. The facts are that you work for me. Your ideas, your research, your time, it all belongs to this company. And in this company, I'm responsible for strategy. You're responsible for support. I stared at her, understanding for the first time that she wasn't just taking credit for my work. She genuinely believed she deserved it. That night, I updated my LinkedIn profile. Added every project I'd worked on. Every skill I'd developed. Every result I'd contributed to. Within a week, I had 3 messages from recruiters. But I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. I had something to prove, and I couldn't prove it from the outside. The turning point came when Tina Morrison, a senior manager from the strategy division, asked me to help compile notes from recent projects for an internal report. Tina was different from Vanessa. She was older, more experienced, and had the kind of quiet confidence that came from decades of success. She was also known for being fair, for recognizing talent wherever she found it. "Just grab everything from Lighthouse and the Morrison Industries analysis," she said. "I need to see how we're tracking against our goals." I handed her 2 folders the next morning. Tina spread the documents across her desk, scanning through them with the kind of focus that meant she was actually reading, not just skimming. "Malerie," she said slowly, "did you write this?" "Which part?" "All of it. The strategy, the analysis, the implementation plan." I nodded. She stared at me for a long moment. "Does Vanessa know I'm asking?" "I don't think she cares who does the work, as long as she gets the praise." Tina's expression changed. Not surprise, more like confirmation of something she'd suspected. "You should say something. This is your work." "I'm just an intern." "No. You're a strategist who happens to be classified as an intern. There's a difference." She leaned back in her chair, studying me. "How long have you been doing this level of work?" "Since I started." "And Vanessa has been taking credit the whole time." "I wouldn't say taking credit. More like, not giving it." Tina laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Malerie, I've been in this business for 20 years. I know the difference between mentoring and exploitation." Over the next few days, I noticed changes. Tina would stop by my desk to ask questions about projects I'd assisted on. She'd include me in meetings where I'd normally be excluded. She'd ask my opinion on strategic decisions, then actually listen to my answers. Other people started noticing too. When I spoke up in meetings, there was less dismissal, more attention. When I submitted research, there were more follow-up questions about methodology and sources. It was like I was slowly becoming visible. The next week, we had another board meeting. Vanessa was presenting the follow-up analysis, my follow-up analysis. She'd barely glanced at it before the meeting, trusting that I'd done the work correctly. But this time, I'd written it more technically. Used frameworks and methodologies that required deep understanding to explain. I wanted to see what would happen when she had to go off script. It didn't take long. "Can you walk us through the competitive positioning matrix?" Davidson asked. Vanessa blinked. Of course. The matrix shows." She fumbled through her notes, clearly lost. I'd used a modified version of Porter's 5 Forces framework, combined with a blue ocean strategy analysis. It was sophisticated but not obscure. Any senior consultant should have been able to explain it. "I'm not seeing how you weighted the criteria," said Janet Wu, the CFO. "The weighting it's based on." Vanessa's confidence was cracking in real time. The room was getting uncomfortable. These were busy people who'd cleared their schedules to hear insights, not watch someone struggle with basic concepts. I sat in my corner, watching her struggle with concepts I'd spent hours perfecting. Part of me felt guilty. Part of me felt vindicated. Mostly, I felt tired. Finally, she looked at me. "Malerie, you helped with the research. Can you clarify the methodology?" This was my moment. I could have stayed silent, let her struggle, preserve the fiction that I was just a note-taking intern. Instead, I stood up. "I can walk you through it." For the next 15 minutes, I explained every detail. The competitive framework. The market analysis. The risk assessment. I answered questions Vanessa couldn't. I defended assumptions she didn't understand. I talked about market dynamics and competitive advantages. I explained why we'd chosen certain metrics over others. I walked them through the mathematical models I'd used to project market share. When Davidson asked about potential risks, I outlined the 3 scenarios I'd modeled. When we questioned the financial assumptions, I explained the sensitivity analysis I'd conducted. When Williams asked about technology implications, I discussed the integration challenges I'd identified. I wasn't just answering questions. I was demonstrating mastery. When I finished, the room was quiet. Not the uncomfortable silence of confusion, but the thoughtful silence of people processing complex information. Davidson was staring at me. You developed this framework? Yes, sir. And the market analysis? Yes, sir. The financial projections? Yes, sir. Vanessa tried to jump in. Well, we collaborated. Actually, I said, reaching into my bag, I have the working files here if you'd like to see them. I plugged in my USB drive. Opened the document. My name was in the file history. My email address was in the metadata. My personal Google Drive was in the sharing settings. I can also show you the email chain where Vanessa asked me to draft something quick, I continued, pulling up my phone. And the Slack messages where she said I could handle the research. The room went silent again. But this time, it was the silence of people realizing they'd been misled. Davidson turned to Vanessa. Is this accurate? Vanessa's face was red. She's exaggerating. I provided guidance. The documents speak for themselves, I said quietly. Tina spoke up from the back of the room. I asked Malerie about this earlier. She wrote the entire lighthouse strategy. I've seen her work. It's exceptional. Davidson held up a hand. We'll follow up on this. Vanessa, you're dismissed for now. She gathered her things with shaking hands, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. As she walked past me, she leaned down and whispered, You have no idea what you've just done. After she left, Davidson turned to me. Malerie, can you stay for a moment? When the room cleared, he sat down across from me. Up close, he looked tired. The kind of tired that came from running a company, from making decisions that affected hundreds of people. How long have you been here? 6 months, sir. And you've been doing this level of work the entire time? Yes, sir. He shook his head. That's unacceptable. Not your work, the situation. You should have been recognized months ago. I'm just an intern, sir. Malerie, I've been in this business for 30 years. I know talent when I see it. You're not just an intern. You're a strategist who's been criminally underutilized. The next morning, I found an email from HR in my inbox. Meeting request for 10 a.m. I walked into the conference room expecting a conversation about my future. Instead, I found Davidson, Tina, and the head of HR waiting for me. Malerie, Davidson said, would like to offer you the junior analyst position. Effective immediately. I stared at him. Sir? Your work speaks for itself. You've been doing analyst-level work for months. It's time your title and salary matched your contributions. What about Vanessa? Ms. Chen has been transitioned out of the company. Effective yesterday. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt relief. Not because she was gone, but because I'd finally been seen. There's one more thing, Davidson continued. We're implementing new policies around intern supervision and project attribution. What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone else. That afternoon, I cleaned out my corner desk and moved to a real office. My name went on the door. My work went on the presentations. My voice went in the meetings. The transition wasn't seamless. Some people struggled to see me as anything other than the intern who used to take notes. But gradually, attitudes changed. My work spoke for itself. 3 months later, I was promoted to senior analyst. The promotion came with a significant salary increase and my first direct report, an intern named Marcus who reminded me of myself 6 months earlier. I made sure Marcus knew his contributions mattered. When he did good work, I put his name on it. When he had insights, I made sure he got to share them. When he asked questions, I took the time to explain not just what to do, but why. 6 months after that, I was leading my own projects. Real projects with real budgets and real deadlines. I was the person clients called when they needed strategic advice. I was the person junior staff looked to for guidance. A year later, I had my own intern, a brilliant young woman named Jessica who reminded me why I'd wanted to work in consulting in the first place. She had ideas. She had energy. She had the kind of fresh perspective that comes from not yet being jaded by corporate politics. I made sure she got credit for her work. I made sure her voice was heard in meetings. I made sure she understood that her contributions mattered. The last time I saw Vanessa, she was walking out of a Starbucks downtown. She was thinner, tired-looking, carrying a folder that suggested she was still job hunting. 6 months had passed since she'd left Meridian, and from what I'd heard through the industry grapevine, she hadn't found anything comparable. She saw me and froze. "Malerie," she said. "Vanessa. I heard about your promotion. Congratulations." "Thank you." We stood there for a moment, two people who'd shared 6 months of professional hell. I was wearing a suit that actually fit, carrying a briefcase that contained work I'd signed my own name to. She was wearing jeans and a wrinkled blazer, carrying rejection letters and amended resumes. "I should have given you credit," she said finally. "Yes," I said. "You should have." I was protecting myself. I thought if I shared the spotlight, there wouldn't be enough for me. There's always enough spotlight for good work. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I know that now. I hope you find what you're looking for." She nodded and walked away. I didn't watch her go. I had a meeting to get to. A presentation to give. Work that mattered. But as I walked back to my office, I thought about the lesson I'd learned. Not just about standing up for myself, but about what real leadership looked like. It wasn't about taking credit or protecting territory. It was about creating space for others to shine. The funny thing about being invisible is that you see everything. You learn everything. You become everything people think you're not. And when you finally step into the light, you're not the same person who started in the shadows. You're the one who was always there. The one who was always capable. The one who was never just taking notes. Now I was the one creating opportunities for others to be seen. The one making sure good work got recognized. The one who remembered what it felt like to be overlooked, and who made sure it never happened on my watch. Because the best leaders aren't the ones who hoard credit. They're the ones who create more of it to go around.